Hello, my name is Anthony. I live in the UK. I'm a qualified chartered surveyor. I have set up and run two successful solar energy companies. I've worked in Germany, China, Hungary, Africa, the US and the UK. I've been following the climate change issue for many years and have read many articles on the subject. And it's my opinion that trying to make governments and large multinational companies to seriously reduce CO2 emissions is a complete waste of time and energy. Why do I think this? Since the first international treaty on climate change in Rio in 1992, very little has actually changed during the last 27 years. In fact, the more scientists warn us of the extreme dangers of climate change, Western politicians appear to stall or even retract policies that help reduce CO2 emissions.
The reason for my view is, as I stand here in 2019, our roads and motorways are so full of cars that are pumping out millions of tonnes of CO2. Even our highways agency is going so far in the opposite direction as to add additional lanes to ease the heavy congestion, even though our scientists are warning us and telling us that we must cut CO2 pollution.
Our buses are travelling almost empty, although we've been told for decades to switch to public transport. Our airports are operating at maximum capacity, with more and more flights and routes opening every year, even though our scientists are warning us that we must stop and reduce flying. Our fields are still full of sheep and cattle, even though our scientists are telling us that they're a massive cause of CO2 emissions. Our supermarkets are still full of meat and dairy products, even though scientists tell us we must cut meat consumption and change to a mainly vegetarian diet now to cut CO2 dramatically and prevent a hothouse Earth. Farmers still spray their crops with toxic chemicals to maximise yields and use every inch of land as they are more concerned with financial subsidies rather than reducing CO2 emissions or improving our health. And when British MPs had the opportunity on the 1st of March 2019 to attend the first climate change debate in 2 years, in the week that saw the UK experience its two hottest ever winter days, only a handful of MPs attended. This clearly shows how much the UK government cares about climate change and reducing CO2. In the last 30 years we have seen developing countries like China grow at breakneck speed that they now pose a trade, financial and possibly military threat to the West. How can the West remain the leading superpower when Asia is developing so fast? They can't, unless something dramatic happens like our climate changes, which puts the world into chaos. Imagine the world where Greenland and Antarctic glaciers melt and sea levels rise considerably. Imagine if the Himalaya glaciers melt that provides 2.6 billion people with fresh water during the summer when water is so desperately needed. Imagine more intense tropical storms, droughts, floods, crop failures and mass migration. As Asia races towards world domination to become the new superpower, they will have huge headwinds to overcome. And because of climate change, they will be forced to forget world domination and instead focus on simple survival. And as countries start to suffer the effects of climate change, they will need new technologies to extract CO2 from the atmosphere to try and bring climate change under control. Western companies and scientists at this time will be ready to sell their new technologies that will be so desperately needed. Therefore, why would Western governments and companies really care about substantially cutting CO2? They don't. In fact, America was so brash about it that they pulled out the Paris Accord to limit warming to 1.5 degrees. The American government, instead, is right now trying to raise funds to build a wall between Mexico and themselves to stop the flow of migrants that they foresee coming. While at the same time, the UK is leaving the EU, so we have more control over our borders. The UK has even relaunched coastal patrol vessels. The UK government, in my opinion, is fully aware of the potential mass migration that will come from Africa and the Middle East arising from acute water shortages. Just recently, the EU announced that they need an army, not because the world is becoming a safer place, on the contrary. So don't waste your effort and time trying to persuade your government or a multinational company to change and seriously reduce CO2 emissions, because they won't until they are good and ready. This is because they know that the world is heading into uncharted waters, and they see huge political and financial rewards from a changing world. Climate change, in my opinion, is a man-made weapon of mass destruction. Yes, a man-made weapon of mass destruction to keep developing nations poor and Western countries in front. This is probably extremely controversial, but in my opinion, it's true. Scientists have been warning governments since the 1970s of the dangers and consequences of burning fossil fuels and releasing huge quantities of CO2 into the atmosphere. Yet our governments ignored their advice and allowed more roads to be built, poorly insulated houses to be built, inefficient cars to fill the roads. The list goes on. Governments around the world are not acting in the people's interest by reducing growth, so we all live within the planet's means. Instead, governments think that they are stronger and can beat climate change with new technologies, and they will be the last man standing. As more and more communities in the coming years are devastated by droughts, floods and wildfires and storms, house prices in areas affected by climate change will fall. And if you live in a vulnerable area, you could end up with nothing, or at best living in a temporary shelter. Move now before it's too late. Protect your family and yourself. If the UK and the US are putting up walls, something is about to happen and it won't be pretty. Don't believe me? We are already seeing thousands of people from Africa risk their lives to cross the Mediterranean to get to Europe. It is estimated that a further 6.6 million people are waiting to cross the Mediterranean. And in India, 60,000 farmers have taken their own lives due to extreme droughts. Whole towns have burned to the ground in America. Water supplies almost run dry in Cape Town, South Africa. Australia is experiencing record heat, and North America has experienced record cold under a polar vortex. The UK had its warmest day ever recorded for February in 2019, and the planet has only warmed 1 degree since pre-industrial times. Wait until we see 2 to 3 degrees of warming. The CO2 and methane has already been released. It's just a matter of time. Furthermore, a truly accurate picture has not been given, as CO2 emissions from the aviation industry and shipping industry are not included in predictions given to the public, nor is potential release of extremely dangerous methane gas trapped in the frozen soils of Canada and Siberia, nor of the effects of the sea warming as the Arctic ice cap melts. I'm not religious, but I do remember my studies at school. Floods will come, Europe will fail, and millions of people will migrate. And don't be fooled by thinking that your government will look after you and your interests. Look at history and you'll see why. Governments around the world did nothing as the smoking industry expanded since the 1920s and put toxic chemicals into cigarettes, which caused millions of adults and children to die prematurely. Governments did nothing and allowed toxic asbestos into thousands of materials, and now tell us it's extremely harmful to our health, which is now killing thousands of people each year. Governments did nothing when food companies loaded our food and drinks with excessive amounts of sugar, so millions become obese and diabetic. Governments again have done nothing to stop our roads and cities becoming so full of toxic cars that we and our children cannot breathe clean air, and millions around the world are dying prematurely. The same is happening again with the generation of young people growing up addicted to the internet. Again, our governments do nothing. Instead, we witness the first trillion-dollar company as a direct result. So don't be fooled. Your government will do nothing dramatic about climate change until your house has been washed away, is a pile of ash, or there is no food or water on your table. History shows us that governments do not care. The same will be with climate change, but this time it will affect everyone on the planet. We are told to stop climate change that we must stop buying so many things, stop flying, dramatically reduce meat consumption, take the bus, walk, cycle, plant a tree, grow your own vegetables, recycle all your rubbish, switch your gas and electric provider to a 100% renewable supplier, install solar panels, turn the temperature down on your thermostat, put a jumper on, fix things that break, buy used items. But hundreds of millions of people in developing countries like India and China are just getting the taste of middle-class life. They want to consume as much as they can, fly when they like, own a car and drive when they like, buy new clothes, TVs, phones and computers, eat meat and drink milk every day. They're not going to stop what they've just started. It's like giving a hungry person their favourite food and then telling them they can't eat it, just as they've got started. And I'm not sure they can or they will stop. In fact, the amount of CO2 China is currently emitting is putting the planet on track to warm by 4 to 5 degrees and India by 3 degrees. And for this reason, I see the health of the planet and survival of poorer civilizations heading very fast towards a brick wall. So unless all countries stop emitting CO2 now, the glaciers will continue to melt and the world will be thrown into chaos. The climate system will jump abruptly from one state to another with devastating effects. Millions of homes will be lost, millions of people will become refugees, and millions could die. And these people will not just be in the developed world. Just now, children in the EU and the UK have put down their pencils in protest to the lack of action governments have taken to reduce CO2 emissions. A spokesperson on behalf of the UK government responded by saying that time is crucial for young people, precisely so they can develop into top scientists, engineers and advocates we need to tackle this problem. This reinforces my view that politicians and big business see climate change as a political and economic tool to gain the upper hand. So my message to you, wherever you live in the world, is get prepared. If you live in a drought-prone area, you could have no water. If you live by the sea, you could be exposed to the sea level rising. If you live in a valley or by a river, you could be exposed to flash floods. If you live on a mountain, you could be exposed to mudslides or extreme snowfall or avalanches. You may live in a forest, woodland or grassland that could burn. You might even live in a city, like millions of people that do today, and could be hit by extreme heat. You may have no water, gas, electric or food. What would you do? Your government or a company is not going to tell you the truth that your home or town could be destroyed by a natural disaster, similar to the 2003 heatwave that killed 35,000 people in Europe, or the horrendous floods or fires that we have witnessed around the world. So my strong advice is, assess very carefully the risks where you live, and then take action. Move if you need to. Arrange for temporary accommodation with family or friends that live in a different part of the country. Keep some tinned food and water with blankets and candles. Keep phone numbers separate in an address book in case your phone doesn't work. Put together an emergency bag, as you do not know when disaster could strike. Be prepared for you and your family's sake. Governments and companies will let us down until we hang ourselves and it's too late. Unfortunately, many of us cannot see disaster coming. Maybe it's part of our makeup as a species, an inbuilt survival mechanism, even though we know that where we live has dangers. Living on the coast where there are tsunamis, living near an active volcano or on a fault line, knowing that disaster could strike at any time. If you are a person, however, that takes action, I strongly suggest that you do. There will be millions of people, however, as I've mentioned, that think it won't happen to them. If you are a thinking person, get prepared and share this message with your family and friends. It could save you and them considerable hardship in a changing world. So thank you for listening to my message, and please take action, and please share this message. Thank you.